The night they came for his father, the desert went still, as if even the wind refused to move until it was done. No coyotes cried, no crickets sang. The whole land just listened, waiting for the sound of something breaking. Eli Stone was only 11 the night he learned what hate could sound like. It wasn't in the crack of a gun or the snap of a whip. It was in the slow, heavy rhythm of boots striking flesh, the kind of sound that brands itself into a child's soul forever. They came at dusk, 5 men from Dry Fork, all ranchers and drunk on their own righteousness. They said Thomas Stone was a traitor, a white man trading food and water to the Navajo. To them, that was reason enough for punishment. They dragged him out in front of his own corral, tied him to the hitching post where he'd trained his horses for years. Lantern lights swung wild in the wind, painting long shadows that danced across the dirt. Eli watched from the barn, trembling in his mother's arms. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "Don't you move, Eli. Don't you make a sound." But he couldn't take his eyes off his father, tall even as he knelt, blood already glistening on his face. The men shouted words Eli didn't understand fully then, things about loyalty, savages, and pride. His father only said one thing in return: "The desert don't belong to any man." The first blow came fast, the next slower, the third landed like thunder. They beat him until his body made no sound but breath, and still he didn't beg. When they finally rode away, their laughter echoed through the night like coyotes on whiskey. Eli ran to his father's side, his knees sinking into the dust. "Pa, Pa, I'll get help." Thomas Stone opened one swollen eye, his voice a cracked whisper. "No, boy, not the town doctor. They'll finish what they started." "Then what do I do?" Eli choked out. "Go east. Find the canyon with red stone walls. There's people there. People who once called me brother. Tell them Thomas Stone sent you." Eli's hands shook as he nodded. "But what about you, Pa?" His father coughed, blood streaking his chin. "Go now, Eli, before they come back. You hear me?" He hesitated only long enough to feel his father's hand fall away. By dawn he was gone, barefoot, clutching a satchel of jerky and water, following the trail east until his legs gave out. Behind him, his mother's cries were carried by the wind, soft and broken, like a prayer too late to be answered. 3 days passed before he found them, or maybe they found him. The Navajo appeared out of the cliffs like spirits carved from the earth itself, painted faces watching him with quiet judgment. The boy fell to his knees. "Please," he said, voice hoarse, "my father's name is Thomas Stone." They exchanged glances. An older warrior, his face lined by years of wind and war, stepped forward. "Thomas Stone?" Eli nodded. "He's hurt, bad. He said you could help." The man's expression softened. "You are his son?" "Yes, sir." "Then you are under our sky now," the man said. They led him into a hidden canyon where smoke from campfires curled into the stars and drums whispered like distant thunder. The people welcomed him not as an intruder, but as the son of a friend. They fed him, tended his wounds, and gave him a blanket of woven red and black. But sleep did not come easy. Every time Eli closed his eyes, he saw his father's face, the lantern light, the fists, the blood. Rage grew in him like fire and dry grass. One night, the old warrior sat beside him by the flames. "You are full of fire," he said quietly, "but fire without purpose burns everything, even the hand that holds it." Eli frowned. "What am I supposed to do with it?" He gazed into the fire. "Feed it to something greater. Learn the way of warriors, not for revenge, but for balance." Eli didn't understand the words then, but they burrowed deep in his heart. When dawn came, he watched the sun rise over the red cliffs and made a vow, one he would keep for the rest of his life. He would return to Dry Fork one day, not as a boy running from pain, but as a man riding with justice. And when he did, the desert would remember his father's name.
The boy who left Dry Fork with nothing but a broken heart returned to life among redstone and silence. The canyon of the Navajo was not a place found on any map. It was carved by patience, guarded by spirits, and hidden from the greed of white men. There, Eli Stone grew under a sky that seemed to stretch forever, where each sunrise looked like fire reborn and every shadow had a story. The first weeks nearly killed him. His hands blistered from carrying water, his skin burned raw under the desert sun, and the Navajo tongue twisted on his lips like a language his mouth was never meant to hold. But he endured, because every time he thought of stopping, he saw his father's face the night of the beating. The blood, the defiance, the quiet strength. That memory was his compass, his reason to keep breathing. They called him Ashkitode, the water boy, because he fetched water more than he spoke. But the elders watched. They saw the way he listened when the warriors spoke of the land, how he tracked lizards by the faintest prints in the dust, how his anger had softened into focus. The old warrior who had first found him, Chayton, whose hair was silver like riverstone, took him under his wing. "You want to be a warrior?" Chayton asked one evening, staring at the boy across the fire. Eli hesitated. "I want to make things right." Chayton nodded slowly. "Then first, you must learn what right means." From that night forward, Eli trained not with fury but with purpose. He learned to ride bareback, to move like the wind through rock and cactus, to read the earth as if it were alive. He learned to listen, to the silence before a storm, to the stories told by firelight, to the drum beats that carried prayers instead of rage. At dawn, he practiced archery until his fingers bled. At dusk, he learned to throw a knife so silent that even the wind didn't hear it coming. By night, he sat among the elders and heard tales of men who became legends, not by killing, but by restoring balance. And slowly, his boyhood began to burn away. But sometimes, when the firelight flickered just right, the shadows reminded him of home, of his mother's voice calling through the wind, of the little corral where his father once taught him to saddle a horse. That ache never left him. It only changed shape, from grief into something sharper. Years passed like rivers cutting through stone. Eli grew tall, his shoulders broad, his eyes steady and dark. His English accent softened under the Navajo tongue. The boy from Dry Fork had become something in between, not white, not Navajo, but something forged by both worlds. Then came the day of the rite of blood and smoke, when young warriors were tested to stand before the elders and prove their spirit worthy of the tribe's name. Each warrior was given one task, to hunt a mountain lion alone and return with its heart still warm. For 3 days, Eli tracked his lion through the cliffs and canyons. He found its prints near the dry riverbed and followed them into the hills, his bow in hand, his breath calm as stone. The sun fell and rose again before he saw it, a massive cat, golden and proud, crouched near a carcass. When it turned its yellow eyes towards him, he felt no fear, only recognition. The animal was not his enemy. It was his mirror, strong, wounded, alone. The kind of thing the world only understood through violence. He raised his bow, and then lowered it. The lion blinked once, then disappeared into the scrub, silent as smoke. When he returned empty-handed, the tribe gathered around him. Chayton stepped forward, his gaze unreadable. "You did not kill?" Eli shook his head. "No. I saw myself in its eyes. Killing it would have been killing what I'm still learning to forgive." The crowd murmured, some disapproving, others thoughtful. Chayton raised his hand for silence. "Then your trial is past," he said finally. For a true warrior does not always draw blood. Sometimes he learns when to let it live. From that night, Eli Stone was no longer Ashkitode. The tribe named him Twazilani, Gray Horse, the one who rides between worlds. But the desert has a way of reminding men that peace never lasts. One hot afternoon, a wounded Navajo scout rode into camp, his horse foaming, his voice broken by dust. He spoke of white riders, men from Dry Fork, crossing the borderlands again, burning camps, taking food, shooting cattle for sport. Eli's breath caught. The name Dry Fork hit him like a gunshot. His hands trembled, not from fear but from the ghost of old pain rising again. Chayton placed a hand on his shoulder. "You know this place." "I was born there," Eli said quietly. "And my father nearly died there." The old warrior nodded. "Then maybe this is the circle coming back to you. But remember, the path of revenge is easy to start, hard to leave." Eli looked east, where the horizon glowed red like fire waiting to be fed. His voice was low but steady. "I won't seek revenge, but I won't stand by and let them poison the land again." That night he stood by the canyon edge, the wind tugging at his hair. Beneath the stars, he whispered his vow once more, not for hate, but for justice. He would return to Dry Fork. And this time, he wouldn't be alone.
The wind that carried Eli Stone back to Dry Fork was not the same one that had carried him away. It was heavier now, full of dust, memory, and the whispers of men long dead. He rode at the front of a long, silent column, 400 Navajo riders moving like a living storm through the canyon. Their faces were painted in ash and ochre, their eyes fixed ahead, their horses breathing fog in the cold dawn. From a distance, they looked like ghosts rising out of the desert. Eli rode on his gray horse, the same color as the morning fog, his rifle slung low and his expression calm as stone. He was no longer the trembling boy who had watched his father bleed under the sun. He had become something the men of Dry Fork would not recognize, and that was exactly how he wanted it. The journey from the Navajo Canyon had taken 3 days. On the first, they rode through silence. On the second, they crossed the Rio Chaco, where the water ran red with clay. On the third, they saw smoke, faint, rising from the east like a warning. Eli stopped his horse on a ridge and looked down at the familiar valley. Dry Fork lay below, exactly as it had been, a cluster of wooden shacks, a small saloon with a hanging sign, a corral of starving horses, and the church steeple leaning slightly, as if the town itself were tired of standing. He could see it all, even the small ranch on the far edge of town, where his father had once raised cattle before pride and cruelty tore everything apart. Beside him, Chayton's horse stopped. "You sure this is the place?" Eli nodded. "This is the place." Chayton studied him for a long moment. "The men we bring, they follow your fire. But remember, boy, fire can cook food or burn the house down. It's your choice which." Eli gave a small, weary smile. "I didn't come to burn. I came to remind them what they forgot." As the sun rose higher, the riders spread out, forming a slow, deliberate descent toward the valley. They made no sound except for the low thud of hooves and the whisper of wind through feathers and hair. The people of Dry Fork noticed first as shadows stretched across their fences and windows. Old Sheriff Dane, a man who once stood by when Eli's father was beaten half to death, stepped out of the saloon, blinking into the light. He was older now, his hair gone gray, his belt still heavy with bullets, but his eyes uncertain. "What in God's name?" he murmured, staring at the sight of 400 Navajo warriors riding toward town with one white man at their head. The townsfolk began to gather, whispering, some running for guns, others for shelter. Eli rode straight down Main Street, his horse's hooves echoing like drums of judgment. The dust swirled behind him, cloaking the Navajo riders in a golden haze. He stopped before the sheriff's office, and for a long, charged moment, the two men just looked at each other, the lawman who once looked away, and the boy who had returned as something unrecognizable. "Do you know me?" Eli asked quietly. The sheriff squinted, his mouth trembling. "No. Can't say I do." Eli dismounted, boots hitting the dirt with a dull thud. "You knew my father. Name was Samuel Stone. You watched him get beaten outside the general store right there." He pointed toward the weathered porch. "You stood by while 5 men broke his ribs, crushed his hand, and called it justice." The crowd behind the sheriff shifted uneasily. "I remember that day," one old rancher muttered. "He was accused of stealing cattle." "He didn't steal," Eli said sharply. "He was owed. But men like you couldn't stand the thought of paying a man who worked harder than all of you combined." His voice was calm, but beneath it ran a current of fury that made the air feel alive. The sheriff's hand twitched toward his holster, then hesitated. "You bringing war to us, boy?" Eli's eyes met his, cold and steady. "I brought memory." He gestured behind him, where hundreds of Navajo riders sat silently on their horses, eyes unreadable. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Finally, an old man stepped forward, a preacher with a crooked cane. "If you've come for vengeance, son, you won't find peace here. The Lord teaches—" Eli cut him off with a tired smile. "I'm not here to kill anyone.
I'm here to make them see. For 15 years, I carried the image of my father's blood in the dust. I thought vengeance would heal it, but all it did was eat me alive. I came to return what they gave me, the shame, the silence, and leave it here where it belongs. He took a step closer to the sheriff. You can draw if you want, but I promise you, if you do, you'll die before the hammer falls. The sheriff swallowed hard, his hand frozen above his gun. Slowly, he let it drop. The tension snapped like a rope cut clean. Eli looked around at the faces, the same faces that had once turned away, pretending not to see a man suffering. You don't need my apology, he said softly. Just your memory. Every man here should remember that justice without compassion is just another kind of sin. He turned, swung onto his horse, and gave a low whistle. The Navajo riders began to move again, circling the town once in silence before following him westward. The people of Dry Fork watched as the dust swallowed them, a living wind of judgment fading into light. But before the last of them disappeared, Eli looked back one final time at the town that had made him and broken him. The church bell rang once, by no hand anyone could see, a single hollow sound echoing across the valley, like a soul set free. He didn't smile. He just rode on. The boy who had left Dry Fork was gone. The man who returned had no more need for hate.
For a few days, peace lay over Dry Fork like a thin blanket, fragile, temporary, trembling in the wind. The dust from 400 hooves had not yet settled when fear began to grow in the cracks of that silence. The townsfolk whispered behind closed doors, the saloon stayed half empty, and the men who had once beaten Samuel Stone, those who were still alive, drank deeper and watched the road west, waiting for the ghost they knew was coming back. Eli Stone had not planned to return again so soon. After he and the Navajo riders vanished into the desert, they made camp near the Red Mesa. He thought the message had been delivered. He thought memory would be enough. But the land has a cruel way of echoing unfinished things. That night, under a swollen moon, a scout rode into camp. His horse stumbled, bleeding from the flank. "Riders," the scout gasped in Navajo, "from the White Town, 20, maybe more. They followed you trail." Eli's eyes hardened. For what? The scout's answer came in a low whisper. Revenge. The camp stirred like a hive. Chayton approached, his old eyes burning with both anger and sorrow. "You showed them mercy, Gray Horse," he said, "but mercy often teaches the wrong men to reload." Eli stared into the fire, the flames dancing in his pupils. "I didn't want a war," he murmured. "I just wanted them to see what they'd buried." Chayton nodded, then prepared to remind them again. By dawn, the sun rose blood-red over the canyon rim. The riders from Dry Fork came in hard and angry, rifles gleaming, their horses frothing with exhaustion. They expected to find a small group of Navajos still sleeping. Instead, they found 400 warriors already waiting in the valley, calm, silent, painted for battle. Eli rode forward alone, his rifle laid across the saddle, but not drawn. "You followed me," he said quietly. "That's brave, or foolish." At the head of the posse rode Tom Carver, a thick-set rancher with hands like clubs and eyes that had forgotten how to be kind. "You humiliated us," Carver spat, "brought your savages into our streets, scared our wives and children. You think you can come here, preach peace, and ride away clean?" Eli didn't blink. "I didn't humiliate you. I showed you yourselves." The man's face twisted with hate. His rifle twitched in his hand. The air went still. For one heartbeat, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Carver pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the valley like a whip, but before the echo faded, 3 Navajo arrows found his chest and he toppled from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. The posse froze. Their courage drained into the sand. "Lay down your weapons," Eli said evenly, though his heart was pounding like a drum. "No one else needs to die." But the men of Dry Fork were not men of peace. They fired wildly, bullets whistling through dust and light. The valley erupted. Eli rode through chaos, shouting orders, trying to stop the killing. But blood once spilled has a voice louder than any man's. Smoke and screams filled the air. Horses screamed, men fell. And when it was over, the valley was silent again.
Only wind and death remained. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the blood-soaked dust. Around him, bodies lay twisted between sagebrush and broken rifles. The Navajo warriors stood in grim silence, their faces streaked with sweat and war paint. Chayton rode up beside him, his eyes heavy. "It is done," he said. "No, it started again," Eli tightened. "I tried," he whispered. "I came for peace, but some debts refuse to stay buried." Chayton placed a hand on his shoulder. "You cannot heal a land that does not want healing, Gray Horse, but you can leave before it poisons you." Eli nodded slowly, rising to his feet. The wind tugged at his coat, scattering dust across the dead. Then he left that valley behind, forever. Before they rode, Eli took one last look towards Dry Fork in the distance. He could almost see the faces of the people, afraid, grieving, silent once more, the same silence that had broken his childhood. But now he understood something. Justice and vengeance were twins, born of the same pain, but only one led a man home. He turned his gray horse towards the sunset, the line of warriors following him into the horizon, leaving behind a town that would never forget his name. And as the wind carried the last of the smoke away, the desert whispered a truth older than any law. Some debts can't be paid in blood, only in leaving it behind.
By the time the gray horse crossed back into the canyon lands, Eli Stone's face looked older than his years. The desert had a way of doing that, wearing down men like wind over stone, smoothing every sharp edge until only truth remained. The 400 Navajo riders followed him in silence, their feathers dark with dust, their eyes carrying the same quiet question: was it worth it? They reached the place where the cliffs met the sky, where red rock glowed like living fire at dusk. The wind there was softer, like a breath from something holy. Eli dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the cool sand. Around him, the land was still. The war cries were gone. The smell of gunpowder had been replaced by sage. But peace, real peace, still felt far away. Chayton came beside him, the old warrior's steps steady despite the battle's toll. "It is finished," he said softly. Eli stared out over the valley below, wide, golden, endless. "It never feels finished," he murmured. "Men die, blood dries, and the land just waits for the next fool to think he can set it right." Chayton studied him for a long time. "You came seeking justice," he said, "and you found sorrow. What will you seek now?" Eli didn't answer. He walked a few paces away, toward a cluster of stones stacked like a marker, a small cairn half hidden by brush. He knelt, brushing away the dust until the name carved faintly on one stone came clear: Samuel Stone. It wasn't much of a grave, just a place he had built years ago, before leaving the canyon for good. He'd carved his father's name with a dull knife, swearing he'd never forget the pain. But now, staring at it again, something inside him began to crumble. "I carried your ghost everywhere. I thought if I made them pay, it'd bring you peace. But it didn't, did it? It just brought more blood. I became the thing I swore I'd destroy." The wind moved through the rocks like a sigh. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried. Chayton's voice came from behind him, deep and calm. "You did not fail him, Gray Horse. You lived what he could not. You showed the land that mercy can stand where vengeance falls." Eli bowed his head. His fingers trembled as he pulled something from his coat pocket, an old rusted horseshoe, the only thing he had taken from his father's corral before leaving Dry Fork as a boy. He placed it gently atop the stone pile. "I forgive them," he said finally, the words breaking like glass in his throat. "Not because they deserve it, but because I do." The wind shifted. A single ray of light broke through the clouds, spilling across the valley like an unseen hand had lifted the sun just for him. For the first time in years, Eli felt the tightness in his chest ease. Not gone, but loosening, like a wound learning to breathe again. He looked back at Chayton. "Tell the others to go home. I'll stay a while." Chayton nodded. "The spirits will keep you company." Then the old warrior turned his horse and rode away, leading the long, solemn line of riders back into the desert. Eli stayed until night fell. He built a small fire and sat beside it, listening to the quiet rhythm of the earth, the sound of crickets, wind, and life continuing, despite all that men had done to each other. The flames danced against the rock, painting shadows that looked like faces he once knew. Then, in the flicker of that lonely firelight, he saw something, not with his eyes, but with the deep sense of memory that sits between heartbeats. His father, Samuel Stone, standing just beyond the glow, his face gentle and calm.
The ghost didn't speak. He just looked at his son, pride in his eyes where there once had been pain. Eli swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I thought you had to fight to keep you alive." The ghost's image shimmered as if smiling. Then, like smoke, it faded into the stars. Eli stared up at the night sky, endless, wide, forgiving. He felt small beneath it, but for the first time, being small didn't scare him. It set him free. When dawn came, he saddled his gray horse again. The desert stretched out before him, silent and golden. There was no destination this time, no vengeance left to chase. Just the road, and the sound of the wind whispering his name like a promise.
Stories like these are never truly finished. They echo across the plains and whisper through the mountains. If you've heard this one, then you know another is always coming. Stay tuned.